Picture a jet so powerful it could climb like a fighter, cruise oceans like a widebody, yet fit a single aisle. Pilots called it the sports car of commercial aviation, a machine that made flying feel alive again. Boeing built 1,050 of them. Airlines lined up to buy. Then, the very airlines who bought it began to dismantle everything that made it exceptional. By 2004, production stopped. By 2025, most were gone. So what went wrong with the Boeing 757? The 757 entered service in January 1983 with Eastern Airlines, and it arrived like nothing the industry had seen before. It wasn't just another narrowbody, it was a narrowbody with wide-body reach. Up to 3,900 nautical miles depending on configuration. It could take off from hot and high airports where other jets choked on thin air. Denver? Mexico City? Bogota? The 757 owned them. Its underwing Rolls-Royce RB211 or Pratt & Whitney PW2000 engines delivered thrust that left pilots grinning on rotation. You felt it in your seat. This jet didn't just take off, it launched. And here's what made airlines pay attention early on. It shared a type rating with the 767. Train a crew on one, they could fly both. That meant lower training costs, more scheduling flexibility, better crew utilization. For airlines rebuilding after deregulation, that was gold. 54 customers ordered them before production ended. 1,050 aircraft rolled off the line. The numbers proved it. This was a jet the world wanted. But here's the paradox. If the 757 was so capable, so loved, so perfectly engineered for the modern era, why did it vanish from production lines barely 2 decades later? Why are most passenger examples already retired? And why do pilots still talk about it like a lost love? The answer isn't what you'd expect. To understand what broke the 757, you need to understand what happened to the airline industry in the 1980s and 90s. Deregulation didn't just change routes, it changed the entire economic model. Airlines weren't just competing on service anymore, they were competing on cost per seat. And that shifted what they actually needed from an aircraft. The 757 was designed for medium to long-range routes. Think transcontinental United States runs. Think transatlantic hops on thin routes where a wide-body made no sense. That was its sweet spot, the niche between short-haul workhorses and long-haul heavies. But airlines had other plans. They started reconfiguring 757s for high-density short-haul operations. Pack in 200-plus passengers. Fly 3-hour hops. Maximize frequency. The jet's range? Irrelevant. Its hot and high performance? Never used. Its ability to cross oceans? Wasted. Here's what that looked like in practice. A jet engineered to fly New York to London on routes barely requiring its first fuel tank. An aircraft with transatlantic capability running domestic shuttles where a 737 would have done the job for less. The mismatch was growing. And while pilots still loved the way it flew, that power, that handling, that feeling of control, finance teams were starting to ask a different question. If we're only using it for short routes, why are we paying for all that extra capability? Here's what the bean counters found when they looked closer. The 757 was more complex than a 737. Bigger airframe, more systems, more involved maintenance schedules. Every flight cycle demanded more from the maintenance crews, more downtime, more labor hours per check. And then there was ETOPS, Extended Range Twin Engine Operational Performance Standards. The certification that let the 757 fly transatlantic routes starting in 1986 for Rolls-Royce powered aircraft and 1992 for Pratt & Whitney variants. It was genuinely useful. It opened up long and thin routes that made the jet profitable on paper. But maintaining ETOPS certification wasn't free. Every ETOPS flight added compliance obligations, more frequent inspections, tighter tolerances, higher standards for engine monitoring. And when you're flying a 757 on short domestic hops that never needed ETOPS in the first place, you're paying for certification you don't use. The crews knew it too. Flight attendants working the rear cabin dealt with engine noise that could make you shout to be heard. One American Airlines attendant said her husband could tell she'd been working the Super 80, a different jet, but same rear-engine acoustic hell, because she'd come home yelling. The 757's underwing engines were quieter, but operational quirks remained. Maintenance chiefs saw longer turnaround times. Dispatchers saw higher per-flight hour costs than simpler alternatives. And on those short routes where airlines were now deploying it, Every dollar of that extra complexity came straight out of profit margins. The jet's safety record was flawless. That was never the issue. The issue was economics. By the late 1990s, the competition had evolved. Airbus had the A321 family. Boeing had newer 737 variants. Both were simpler. Both were cheaper to operate on short to medium routes. Both burned less fuel per seat on the missions airlines actually needed. And fuel efficiency? That became everything. The 757 was efficient for 1980s standards, 20% better than the DC-9 jets it replaced. But by 2000, that wasn't good enough anymore. The A321 and 737 Next Generation delivered better seat mile costs on the routes where the 757 was actually being flown. Orders dried up. In November 1999, Boeing began studying production rate cuts. In October 2003, Continental Airlines switched its remaining 757-300 orders to 737-800s. That was the final signal. Boeing announced the end of production that month. The 1,050th aircraft, the last 757 ever built, rolled off the Renton line on October 28, 2004, delivered to Shanghai Airlines the following November. And here's the thing, there was no true successor. The 757 carved out a unique niche, too capable for a 737, too small for a 767. Perfect for routes that barely existed anymore. Aviation analysts still argue no single aircraft has ever truly replaced it. The A321 XLR tries. The rumored Boeing 797 might. But neither fits exactly where the 757 lived. After 2020, retirements accelerated. COVID gave airlines the excuse to park aging, costlier jets permanently. Delta, United, American. One by one, the 757 vanished from passenger fleets. The jet everyone loved had nowhere left to fly. So what went wrong? Nothing. And everything. The 757's decline wasn't caused by engineering failure. It wasn't safety. It wasn't reliability. Every metric that mattered to pilots and passengers said this jet was exceptional. What killed it was an economic mismatch. Airlines bought a specialist tool, a jet designed for medium to long-range missions, and used it as a generalist workhorse on short-haul routes where its strengths became liabilities. The very capabilities that made it brilliant became costs they didn't need. The range? Unused. The power? Overkill. The ETOPS certification? An expensive compliance burden on domestic hops. The 757 was caught between two worlds. Below it, simpler narrowbodies like the 737 and A320 families kept improving, delivering lower costs on the routes airlines actually prioritized. Above it, more fuel-efficient widebodies handled the long-haul missions better. The middle ground, where the 757 excelled, disappeared. But the story doesn't quite end there. The 757 found a second life in cargo. FedEx. UPS. Converted freighters still fly the routes passenger variants abandoned, proving the airframe's fundamental strength. Those jets will keep flying well into the 2030s, doing the job they were always capable of. And the question of a successor? Still unanswered. The A321 XLR extends range, but lacks the same thrust-to-weight magic. Boeing's proposed new mid-size airplane, the 797, remains a concept, a promise of filling the gap the 757 left behind. Which tells you everything. A jet this capable, this loved, this well-engineered, and the industry still hasn't figured out how to replace it. That's the legacy of the Boeing 757. Not a failure of design, a tragedy of economics, a reminder that even perfection dies when the market moves beneath its wings. If this deep dive into one of aviation's most fascinating rise and fall stories resonated with you, hit subscribe to Plane Theory. Every week we go inside the aircraft, airlines, and decisions that shape the industry and the forces that sometimes end them. The next story is already on approach. Don't miss your boarding call.